Hi everybody, back with another PSA. So this time we're gonna get back to the community. Anytime you come in for your appointment, make sure you're bringing in a canned good or dry food item, and it will be $5 off of your entire service for that day. I'm doing it up until the day before Thanksgiving, and I'm going to be giving that back to the community. Shaded Aesthetics, we love the community over here because you guys love us. So it will be going to a local food bank, and I just want to help a family in need or a homeless person, anybody in need. And this is the way I want to do it. So everybody be blessed, be safe, be productive, and remember, bringing a canned good or dry food item, $5.
Imagine celebrating Christmas with your family, feeling the warmth of togetherness, the joy of the season, only to be found dead hours later in a horrific fire. A promising young mother, a driven entrepreneur with a future full of possibilities, her life stolen in a violent, unforgivable act. The person who took her life was someone she once trusted, her own jealous ex-boyfriend. This is the tragic and shocking story of Keera Brabham. Keera's life was one filled with love, ambition, and the promise of success. A mother devoted to her young son, a businesswoman who built her dreams from the ground up, and a woman who was finally stepping into her future. But what seemed like a simple tragedy, a life lost in a fire, was anything but accidental. Behind the flames, a darker, more twisted story was unfolding, one of obsession, control, and betrayal. Keera's family would soon discover that the person responsible for her death was someone who should have protected her, not destroyed her. But who could have committed such a heinous act? What would drive someone to destroy the life of a woman so full of promise? You'll find out. But first, let's take a closer look at who Keera was before this tragedy unfolded. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated. Your support means the world to us, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you. Keera Brabham wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a woman who lived with purpose, with ambition, and with a heart that loved fiercely. Born on February 24, 1994, in Mount Vernon, New York, Keera was the youngest of 3 children in the Brabham family. Her parents, Curtis and Juliet, moved their family to Vero Beach, Florida in 1997 to care for their aging relatives. It was a small town, a fresh start, and a place where Keera would begin to chase her dreams. From an early age, Keera's potential was undeniable. She wasn't just book smart. She was gifted, a young woman with a drive to do something bigger than herself. In high school, she excelled academically, earning college credits while balancing the pressures of growing up. But even then, it was clear, Keera was destined for something extraordinary. After high school, she briefly pursued a career in nursing, enrolling at Florida A&M University before transferring to Tallahassee Community College. But as much as she worked hard, something didn't feel right. Nursing wasn't her passion. What truly lit her up was the world of beauty, the ability to help others feel confident in their own skin, and the space to create a life on her own terms. In 2017, Keera made the bold decision to leave nursing behind and follow her heart. She launched her own business, Shaded Aesthetics, a beauty service specializing in facials, waxing, and lash extensions. Starting from her parents' home, Keera built her dream business from the ground up. She wasn't just running a beauty salon. She was creating a space where women of all backgrounds could feel comfortable, seen, and empowered. She called it Shaded Aesthetics for a reason. No matter your skin tone or background, Keera welcomed everyone into her world with open arms. By 2023, Shaded Aesthetics had grown beyond her wildest dreams. Keera was no longer working out of her parents' home. She had opened a larger location in Sunrise, Florida. She was proud of how far she had come, and her clients were loyal to her, not just for her skills, but because Keera made them feel like they were more than just clients. She built a community, a family, a brand that stood for confidence and inclusivity. Life was falling into place. Keera had worked so hard to create the future she dreamed of. And yet, what lay ahead was something that no one, especially Keera herself, could have ever imagined. But what most people didn't know about Keera What her clients never saw was the darkness that was slowly creeping into her life. Behind the success, behind the social media posts filled with smiles and triumph, there was something lurking. Someone lurking. Someone who had once been close to her, but whose presence would soon tear her world apart. His name was Lled Emil. It was the night after Christmas, a time when the world is supposed to be full of warmth, love, and joy. Keera had spent the day with her family in Vero Beach, celebrating the holiday with laughter, gifts, and the embrace of those she loved most. Her son, Mo, was the light of her life, and they shared moments that would forever be cherished. Her social media posts from that day painted the picture of a mother at peace, filled with gratitude for the life she was building and the family she had. But as the clock struck midnight, Keera said goodbye to her family and drove back to her apartment in Tamarac, Florida. She had big plans for the future, but none of them included what was about to happen next. In those final hours, she had no idea that her life was slipping through her fingers. At 3:30 a.m., the stillness of the night was shattered by screams. Horrific, frantic screams, echoing from the Versailles Gardens condominium complex. Neighbors were jolted awake, confused and terrified by the violent noise. Moments later, the fire alarms rang out, and thick, suffocating smoke began pouring from apartment 203, where Keera lived. Panic spread through the building as people scrambled to evacuate, but it was already too late. Fire crews arrived at the scene with urgency, battling the flames that were consuming the apartment. The fire seemed to take on a life of its own, as if it were a force of nature, uncontrollable and relentless. As firefighters fought to put out the blaze, they combed through the complex, searching for anyone who might be trapped inside. They had no idea what they would find. Inside apartment 203, Keera lay unresponsive on the floor. The fire had not claimed her life in the way most would expect. She had no visible burns, no singed skin. She was not the victim of a random tragedy. She was the victim of something far darker, far more deliberate. Despite the quick response of emergency crews, Keera was rushed to the hospital, but there would be no miracle. She was pronounced dead soon after her arrival, her life extinguished in the most horrifying way imaginable. For those who loved her, the pain of this moment was incomprehensible. How could something so senseless happen? Keera, a mother, a daughter, a friend, gone. The question burned in their minds. Why her? And even more troubling, who could have done this to her? The police and fire department initially suspected an accidental fire, but the circumstances quickly suggested something far more sinister. Keera's family, reeling from the shock, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just an unfortunate accident. The fire had been contained to only her apartment, and her car was missing from the complex. That was the first clue. Something didn't add up. It was the feeling of dread, of knowing deep down that this wasn't just an accident. This was personal. Someone had planned this. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had taken Keera's life. And as the investigation began, the truth would slowly unfold, revealing a devastating story of obsession, control, and revenge. What they found was far worse than anyone could have imagined. But who was behind this? Who had the power to destroy Keera's life, to leave her family in this unthinkable grief? The answer was already out there, lurking in the shadows of her past, waiting to be uncovered. And when it would change everything. As the smoke settled and the firefighters cleared the scene, one thing became painfully clear. This was no ordinary fire. What had been thought to be a tragic accident was beginning to show signs of something much more malicious. Keera's family, still reeling from the shock of her loss, immediately suspected foul play. They knew there was no way this could have been a random incident. Something, or rather someone, had to be behind it. But who? It wasn't long before Keera's family began to point to the one person they feared most. Her ex-boyfriend, Lled Emil. Keera had ended their relationship just a few weeks before her death, but in that short time, Emil's obsession with her had only grown. At first, he had seemed like any other guy. Charming, quiet, reserved, but behind closed doors, he was becoming someone entirely different. His behavior had shifted from caring to possessive, from affection to control. Keera's family recalled her saying things like, "He just won't leave me alone. He keeps showing up at my work, at my house, even when I tell him to stay away." These weren't just passing comments. They were warnings. She had been frightened. Keera had always been independent, strong-willed, but in the weeks leading up to her death, she had confided in her family that she was scared. Scared of what Emil might do if she truly ended things. What started as a few obsessive texts soon spiraled into something darker. Keera began receiving strange, cryptic messages. Messages that didn't make sense, that felt invasive, threatening. "I know where you are. You can't get away from me." He was showing up uninvited at her work and at her home. She could feel his eyes watching her every move, making her feel trapped. Keera had made it clear to those around her. She wanted him out of her life. She had broken up with him, but Emil didn't take rejection well. In fact, he couldn't. He felt entitled to her, as though she was his and only his, and he wasn't about to let go. But despite her repeated pleas for him to leave her alone, Emil's obsession only grew stronger. The night of the fire was no coincidence. It wasn't just an unfortunate twist of fate. Keera's family was sure of it. And when investigators dug deeper into the events surrounding the fire, they began to uncover a pattern that pointed directly to Emil. Keera's car was missing from the complex that night. She had been out, enjoying time with friends and family, and then returned to her apartment. But after the fire, her car was nowhere to be found. That was the first piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Why was her car gone? Where had it gone? The missing car wasn't just an oversight. It was a glaring clue that something had gone horribly wrong. Emil, who had access to her life, to her space, may have taken it. Then there were the accounts from neighbors, people who had heard the terrifying sounds coming from her apartment that night. Banging, screaming, shouts for help. These weren't just random noises. They were signs of a struggle that no one could ignore. A neighbor described hearing a loud argument just before the fire broke out, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone yelling, "Call 911." But by the time help arrived, it was already too late. As investigators continued to piece together the timeline of events, one thing became clear. Lled Emil was at the center of it all. He was the one who had been lurking in the shadows, the one who had turned love into obsession. And now, with Keera gone, his violent rage had destroyed everything she had worked for. Detectives gathered evidence. Phone records, text messages, surveillance footage, and everything pointed back to Emil. The evidence began to mount, and soon it became impossible to ignore. They found messages Keera had received just hours before the fire. Texts that were chilling in their clarity. "You can't get away from me. I know what you did." Emil's inability to accept rejection, his obsessive need to control, and his volatile emotions had led to a tragic, irreversible act. He wasn't just a man scorned. He was a man driven by a darkness that could no longer be contained. And it was that darkness that had ultimately led to Keera's death. The investigation wasn't just about finding the facts. It was about uncovering the horrifying truth behind why a woman, full of life and potential, was killed by someone who should have never been part of her life to begin with. Emil's arrest was coming, but what did he have to say for himself? Was he remorseful, or was he still trying to control the narrative? What would his arrest reveal about the man behind the obsession? The answers were closer than ever, but they wouldn't come easily. The horror of Keera's death wasn't just a nightmare for her family. It was a shockwave that reverberated through her entire community, her friends, her clients, her loved ones. Everyone who had been touched by her warmth and energy now had to face the brutal reality that she was gone. There were no answers, no closure, just a deep, aching void that no one knew how to fill. But one thing was clear: her family would not rest until they had justice for Keera. As they buried their pain, her family turned their grief into resolve. They knew Keera hadn't just died in a tragic accident. They knew her life had been taken, stolen, by someone who should have cared for her. But who was responsible? And why had they done it? The evidence against Lled Emil grew stronger with each passing day. As investigators dug deeper, they found more and more pieces of the puzzle. They interviewed neighbors who had witnessed Emil's obsessive behavior, family members who had seen the warning signs, and friends who recalled Keera's increasing fear in the days before the fire. Keera's sister, Stephanie, couldn't forget the warning signs. She remembered how, just days before Keera's death, her sister had tapped her on the shoulder during a night out and whispered in her ear, "He's texting me weird things. He's being a stalker." At that moment, Stephanie didn't realize how serious it had become. She didn't know that those words would mark the beginning of a tragedy that would forever change their lives. The days after Keera's death were filled with pain, confusion, and endless questions. But the more they learned, the more they realized that Lled and Emil had been lurking in the shadows, refusing to let go of someone who had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. And now Keera was dead. The man who had stalked her, controlled her, and ignored her pleas for freedom was the same person who had stolen her life in the most brutal of ways. Her family couldn't just sit back and wait for justice to unfold. They had to make sure Keera's voice was heard. They had to make sure the world understood the danger of toxic relationships and obsessive control. They knew that if they didn't keep pushing, if they didn't keep searching for the truth, Keera's death would be forgotten. In those painful weeks after the fire, they became their own investigators. They went through Keera's belongings, her phone, her messages, all the pieces that might hold the key to understanding what had truly happened. They began to see the signs more clearly. The unsettling texts from Emil, the uninvited visits, the way Keera had started to withdraw from him, setting boundaries that he refused to respect. And then the final blow: Keera's car was missing. It was more than just a coincidence. It was a message. And her family knew it was a sign of something far worse than an accident. Emil's behavior was becoming more and more impossible to ignore. He had harassed Keera to the point where she feared for her life. She had tried to move on, to escape, but he had followed her. He had stalked her, watched her, made her feel like there was no way out. And now he had gone too far. He had taken everything from her, her life, her future, her son. Finally, after nearly 2 months of relentless investigation, the evidence became undeniable. Law enforcement had gathered enough to take action. On February 15, 2024, Lled Emil was arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder and arson, the very crimes that had destroyed Keera's family. Keera's family was left with mixed emotions. Relief that the man responsible for her death was finally behind bars, but also a deep, unshakable sadness. Their beloved Keera was gone, and no amount of justice could bring her back. They would never see her smile, hear her laugh, or watch her son grow up with his mother's guidance. But there was still something they had to do, something that felt like the only way to honor Keera's memory. They would make sure her story was heard. They would make sure that the signs of toxic relationships, the warning signs that Keera had seen too late, would never be ignored again. They would make sure that no one else had to suffer the way she had. For Keera's son, Mo, the world had been turned upside down. At just 4 years old, he would have to grow up without his mother, without the love and guidance that every child deserves. It was a tragedy that no child should have to endure. But her family would make sure he knew the truth about his mother, about how strong, loving, and determined she was to create a better life for him. Lled Emil's arrest was a small step toward justice, but it was just the beginning. What was his motive? What did he have to say for himself? Was he truly remorseful, or was he still trying to manipulate the story? As the case continues, the search for justice is far from over. As the days turn into weeks and the weeks into months, the pain of Keera's loss remains raw, unrelenting, and ever-present. Her family struggles to make sense of a life taken far too soon, a life that was full of potential, love, and dreams yet to be realized. Keera was a woman who had fought so hard to build something for herself, for her son, for her future. But in a moment of jealousy, obsession, and rage, that future was stolen from her. Her son, Mo, will never get to feel the warmth of his mother's embrace as he grows. He will never hear her laugh, never feel the comfort of her voice telling him that everything will be okay. That is the most tragic loss of all. The life of a young boy whose world has been turned upside down by the actions of one man. How do you explain to a child that his mother is gone forever? How do you fill the empty space left in his heart? The space that was once filled with the love and care of the woman who gave him life. Keera's family will carry this weight for the rest of their lives. Her mother, Lled, will never hold her daughter again. Her sister, Stephanie, will never share another conversation, another laugh. They will live with the memory of a woman who brought light into their lives, a woman who deserved so much more than the violence that ultimately took her. But Keera's death is more than just a tragedy. It's a warning, a reminder of how dangerous unchecked jealousy can be. A warning to anyone in a toxic, controlling relationship, no matter how subtle it may seem, that sometimes it's not just about power. It's about control. It's about making sure the other person is always under your thumb, even if that means destroying them, physically and emotionally, until they're nothing but a shell of who they once were. Keera had recognized the signs. She had known that Emil was dangerous, that his obsession would only grow. But by the time she made the decision to end the relationship, it was already too late. Her family now speaks openly about the warning signs, the things that seemed so small at the time but were actually harbingers of something far more dangerous. They want other women, other families, to learn from Keera's story, to understand that sometimes ending a relationship isn't enough. Sometimes you need to walk away, cut ties completely, and take steps to protect yourself from someone who refuses to let go. In the aftermath, Keera's family has made it their mission to ensure her death wasn't in vain. They have become advocates for recognizing the signs of domestic violence, for standing up to toxic relationships, and for making sure that no one else has to experience the same pain. They know that Keera would have wanted that. She would have wanted her story to make a difference, to save someone else from the heartbreak that has consumed them. Justice may have been served with Emil's arrest, but it doesn't bring Keera back. The void in her family's heart remains, and the pain of loss will never fully fade. Her son will grow up with the memory of his mother in his heart, but the moments they should have shared will never be realized. The life she could have had, one filled with love, success, and joy, was stolen from her in the cruelest of ways. And so, as we remember Keera, let us also remember the lessons her story teaches us. Let us recognize the dangers of obsessive behavior, the warning signs of control, and the devastating consequences of domestic violence. Let us stand up for each other, speak out when we see the signs, and ensure that no one else has to suffer the way Keera did. Keera may no longer be with us, but her legacy, her message, lives on. And it's up to all of us to make sure that her story continues to inspire change, to offer hope, and to remind us that we are all responsible for watching out for each other. Before you go, take a moment to reflect on the relationships in your life. Are there warning signs you've been ignoring? Are there people around you who might need help? Don't wait until it's too late. Reach out, speak up, and make a difference before someone else's story ends too soon. As we reflect on Keera's story, it's impossible not to feel the weight of the warning signs that went unnoticed, the pain of a life lost too soon, and the deep impact her death has had on everyone who knew her. This case, like so many others, begs the question, how often do we ignore the signs of a toxic, dangerous relationship until it's too late? Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever noticed red flags in a relationship that seemed harmless at first but grew more concerning over time? Maybe it wasn't your own relationship, but someone you cared about. Did you recognize the signs but didn't know how to act? Take a moment to answer this question. Have you or someone you know ever experienced toxic, controlling behavior in a relationship? Yes, no, or I'm not sure. This isn't just about Keera's story. It's about all of us. How many of us have seen the signs of jealousy, control, or obsession and dismissed them as nothing more than a momentary issue? It's time to start talking about it. It's time to stop ignoring those small but crucial behaviors that can escalate into something far darker. I want to know what you think. Leave your thoughts, your experiences, and your insights in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to leave a toxic relationship? How did you find the strength to walk away? For those of you who've supported loved ones through similar experiences, what advice do you have for someone who may be in a similar situation? If you think Keera's story is something more people need to hear, don't hesitate to share this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Share it with a friend, a colleague, or a family member. You never know who might be silently struggling, who might need that extra push to recognize the danger and seek help. And if you're new here or haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying up to date on important stories, you're also supporting the conversation around these tough but necessary topics. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Together, we can make sure these stories are heard, and more importantly, we can make sure people know there's always help, there's always a way out, and no one should ever have to face danger alone. So, again, let's keep the conversation going. Comment below, vote in the poll, and don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your voice, your experience, and your perspective could be the one thing that helps someone take that first step towards safety. Keera's life may have been cut short, but her story will inspire others to stand up against the toxic behaviors that can silently tear lives apart. Remember, every day is a chance to make a difference in someone's life. Let's take care of one another. Speak up when we see the signs, and never let someone feel they have no choice but to endure abuse.